Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by OpenAI. If you're looking for a dynamic, exciting position, we're hiring a Board of Directors Relationship Manager. Episode 281, A Day in the Life of a React Native Developer, 2023 edition.
Hey everybody, I'm Jamin, and this is a series on React Native Radio called Real Life React Native. It's a series where we interview developers who work on actual React Native apps that are shipping to actual people, actual users. They're quick and rapid fire and hopefully fun. Let's get started. So today I'm sitting down with Benedikt Müller. He's an engineer, founder, and indie hacker, originally from Essen, Germany, and has been in Singapore for the past 2 years. Thanks for coming on, Benedikt.
Thanks, Jamin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, and it's a little bit of a meta topic, and people will see why once we get into it. It's kind of fun. But I want to start off, the app that we're talking about is called Share My Stack. And in a lot of ways, this is an app that is not that different from these shows where we're talking about, you know, the inner workings of your app. I'll be asking you about your stack. But first off, let's get the elevator pitch for your app. What's Share My Stack all about?
So it's about sharing your stack. Actually, first it started out not thinking about developers and their stack, but thinking about productivity stacks. So it was supposed to be meant for people who are really into productivity to share what kind of stack they use in terms of note-taking, task management, AI helpers. So people like to share what tools they are working with. And then when I got it into the hands of the first beta users, many of them were developers. And a very common feedback was, that's nice, but I also want to share the stack that I use to build things when I'm developing, right? So now it's kind of meant for both. You can have multiple stacks. You can share your productivity stack, but you can also share your development stack. So what's the IDE you use? Which languages do you program in? Which frameworks do you use? It's meant as a way to curate this. You can curate your stack and also share it. You can generate a nice image, which you can share on social media. You can look at other people's stacks, discover what they are using. That's the basic idea.
Yeah, I downloaded it when I was prepping for this show, and it just landed, right? You just launched it recently?
Yeah, it launched like 2 days ago.
And we're recording this in like mid-October, so by the time people see this, it'll only still be about a month old, something like that. So very good timing here. And I also see I have development and productivity in my stacks, but I also see that there's some others coming soon, like creator, design, school, startup. I assume you have lots of ideas.
Yeah, I have lots of ideas, and also people that I showed that to had lots of ideas. So for example, teacher is in there. My wife is a teacher. And when she saw this, she said, yeah, that would be nice, because we talk about which tools do we use to do like classroom management and doing worksheets for class. So I think there's like lots of applications for people to share what they use to work.
So let's dig a little deeper here. You used React Native for this. I want to know, why did you start using React Native in the first place? And then why did you choose it for this app in particular?
Let me maybe start with the second one. Why did I choose this for the app? It's the thing I know.
That's a good reason.
Which brings us to the first question. Why did I start using React Native in the first place? And maybe the answer could be something similar. It was very close to something that I knew, because I first started working with React. And then when I went into, got interested in mobile applications, it was very obvious to go for React Native, because then I could reuse a lot of what I had learned.
That's definitely a common thing, is people come from web, they come from React, and then they come into React Native and it's more familiar. Of course, there's all kinds of depth that has to happen within React Native itself. But going a little deeper on that, what's the stack within React Native? What packages are you using right alongside React Native to build this?
Yeah, so I rely very heavily on Expo, because this was the way I was introduced to React Native. So I think when I started, I wasn't even really aware of React Native. I discovered Expo, and started working with Expo and just only later realized that this meant I had become like a React Native developer, apparently. So yeah, I'm using a lot of their packages. Other than that, I would say there's not a lot of special additional packages. One thing that I'm using, which is Watermelon DB, which is a solution to do offline first development. It's based on SQLite, which means you have like a local SQLite database in your app. And then you can implement some synchronization with a backend. For the backend, I'm using Supabase, and for the most part, I'm synchronizing my local Watermelon DB with my Supabase backend using remote procedure calls into the database on Supabase. But also for some things where this is not like appropriate, for example, if you create a new account, you want to make sure that the username is not taken. And for this, of course, you don't work with local data. You have to go to the backend directly. And for this, I'm using the Supabase SDK directly.
I was pretty happy that @Jamin was not taken yet, so I snagged that and grabbed it. Can you describe some challenges that you encountered while you were developing your app using React Native? Like what did you run into?
For the basic app, there were not a lot of like real challenges. Using Expo, using React Native, also using the Watermelon DB plugin was fairly straightforward. The Watermelon DB plugin requires some native dependencies, but those were fairly easy to incorporate as well. They have a blog post out there which has an approach to do it. I went a little different route because I saw that they have like a native plugin, but I quickly saw that you don't even need that because from Expo, there's a plugin which is called build properties. I think Expo build properties or custom build properties, which allows you to customize basically the building behavior of your app and insert, for example, extra pod files that will be included or extra pod dependencies that will be included in the pod file. And here I could just add whatever Watermelon DB required in addition, and then it worked. So that was good. One thing that is little bit more special and more deep, which I haven't released for Share My Stack yet, is some time ago I built a custom plugin myself to work with app clips or to create app clips. That's something where I, for the first time, like really had to leave the JavaScript and React land and really at least attempt to understand what the native side of things looks like. And that was like a pretty good learning experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about how Expo has tackled the question of how do you do native changes to your apps, and what kind of came out of it. I don't know if it was intentionally or not, but what came out of it was the ability to, anytime you want, generate your native project, just from those config plugins and different configuration things that you're doing, which makes upgrades a lot easier, which is a really cool side effect of using Expo. I think that's really fantastic. And going back to Watermelon DB for a second, I know Radek, he's a fantastic developer, and he has done a really amazing job with Watermelon DB. I'd love to talk with him more about it on the podcast at some point. I have a question about, have you used Maestro? I feel like you mentioned that you used Maestro with your React Native app.
Yeah, I have played with it. I'm not big into testing, I have to admit.
That's okay. Nobody will listen to this.
That's good. So yeah, I didn't write any unit tests or something like this for Share My Stack, to be honest. But yeah, of course, I did want to have some kind of like assurance that things don't break if I add things or change things around. And yeah, that's when I discovered Maestro and played with it and like really liked how easy it was to adopt it. So maybe as a short explanation for listeners who haven't used it, it's basically, I think you call it UI-based testing. So you basically write a script and then it will run your app in a simulator and basically simulate a user working with the app. And the script can be written like writing code. I think it's YAML code. But you can also use like their Studio, which is an interactive tool to in this case, you would just be using your app basically, and it's recording this and translating it into YAML. And then, of course, you can like edit the YAML to insert variables and stuff. But basically, it means you have like a repeatable script that just is played in the simulator. And then Maestro can detect if the screen looks like what it should look like. And if it differs or if the app crashes, it, of course, notices. And then you know that something went wrong.
Yeah, I like to have like smoke tests, more or less, where I can run through it and I know at least not the happy paths, at least I know that those work versus, maybe some of the edge cases. I can go through and check those as well. And anytime that I have, if I lack confidence that I need to make sure that this part goes perfectly according to plan, and if any changes that I make, are going to touch that, then I might write a test for it. Maestro does make it pretty easy. I love this next question. What advice would you give companies considering React Native? Maybe they haven't made the decision yet. What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm careful with like prescriptive answers. I know like everyone has to come to their own conclusion, and there might be good reason for any choice, right? But yeah, of course, I can tell my perspective, and for me, like the most powerful thing about React about React Native isn't even about React Native itself. It's about TypeScript. What I'm doing with Share My Stack, but also with maybe backing up a little bit, Share My Stack is an app that I built because I wanted to release something very quickly, because I've been working on a bigger project since 1.5 or 2 years almost now, and that will take some time. So this was one that I wanted to release quickly. But what I'm basically trying to do with both of them, but especially with the other app, is to showcase and prove what like a single person can do nowadays. And for me, this power comes from using a single programming language all over the place, right? I'm building a backend. I'm writing like Lambda functions in TypeScript. I'm even orchestrating the whole architecture, the whole infrastructure on AWS using TypeScript, using their cloud development toolkit, CDK. I'm building for the other one. I'm doing a CLI, which is done in TypeScript. The website is done in TypeScript. The mobile app is done in TypeScript. So my point is like, with this one language today, you can build almost anything you need. I mean, for everything, there might be like edge cases and special cases where you can do something more efficient in Rust maybe, or where something else is like more appropriate. But I think for like the vast majority of cases, TypeScript is really good enough. And then alone, the fact alone that you have this one language that you can use for every one of those components makes it really powerful for a single developer. And you asked about companies specifically. And there, of course, I see the advantage of you have like this one language and everyone in the company needs to be proficient in this language. Then maybe people specialize into front end or back end or whatever. But it's easy to train people who did back end to now become front end developers and the other way around, or people to share code between back end and front end. I think especially with React server components becoming a thing now, and maybe even becoming a thing in React Native soon, I think also this distinction between backend and frontend is really might be vanishing, at least to some extent, right? So, and with this, it becomes even more powerful to have to master the one language that can do like both ends of the equation.
Yeah, I love that answer. The answer isn't so much about React Native. It's about TypeScript everywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't just apply to single solo founders like yourself, who obviously that matters quite a lot to have your own, one language that you can kind of lean on, but also teams. Like you mentioned, you have many teams across the board, but they can share knowledge, they can share techniques, they can help each other, they can switch to different parts of the app and still feel comfortable. They understand the tooling, they understand all these things. That's a great answer.
I would add one caveat, if I may, because one thing I think that makes it a bit tricky today is like if you have different languages or technologies in, for example, front end and back end, it makes the distinction quite clear. And then you like have writing in one language or in another language. And it like for your mental model, it's pretty easy to distinguish. With TypeScript, what I do see as a challenge is you use the same language, but you have different capabilities. And also with all that is going on with CommonJS and ESM and the different compilers and runtimes, it can be a bit daunting to, yes, use the same language, but think in terms of different bundlers, language capabilities, and so on. So that's the one caveat I would make. But I think this is getting better at a high speed. And also, yeah, it still leaves the point standing that there's this one language that you can master and then you can apply everywhere.
That's a great point. The tooling and the environments are going to be different, and you will need to keep that in mind as you move around. It may not be quite as apparent as if you were to go to the back end and it's in Go or Ruby or Elixir or something like that. What advice would you give to new React Native developers?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I thought about how I learned React Native, and there's, I think, pros and cons about it. So I came to React Native, as I said, from React and via using Expo. And for a long time, I had no contact with the native side of things at all. So that made it fairly easy, I would say. And I could make progress very fast. And it's really fulfilling to just have a mobile app within a day that you can see on your phone, right? Without having done it before. So that's pretty cool. But it also means that for a long time you are kind of working in a bubble. And then for me, I had to learn what this native side of things was at some point. And it was pretty surprising for me. I heard a lot about upgrading problems and what do you do with the native code. And for me, a long time, native code didn't exist at all. So I would say this is the drawback you have to be conscious about if you come from the React side. But I still think it's a good learning path to say, just start with the React basics, understand how React works and hooks and components and rendering and that stuff. And then bring that over into a mobile app and realize that basically you are still writing React and just using a few different UI primitives. So that's I think that's the path that spares a lot of the pain for later. So be aware that there might be some pain, but I think it's important for people who get into things to have success very quickly, to not give up, right? And I think that's a path where you can come very far and have good success and see something that's working without too much learning effort.
Yeah, I like to say that React Native, it's a short distance to becoming productive, but it's a very long distance to really achieving, deep understanding of the stack, just because of how deep it goes. I've been doing this for over 8 years now, and I'm still learning things every single day about React Native, this technology and everything.
Yeah, well said.
Thanks so much, Benedikt, for joining us today for our real life React Native series. Good luck with the app launch. I really hope it goes well.
Thank you very much, Jamin.
If you'd like to be on this new series and talk about your experience using React Native in the real world, email us at rnradio@infinite.red and introduce yourself and your app. We'll see you all next time.
As always, thanks to our production team with editor Todd Worth, our assistant editor and episode release coordinator, yours truly, Jed Bartosky, our director of marketing, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Our producer and host is Jamin Holmgren, and executive producers and hosts are Robin Hines and Mazen Chame. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio wherever you get your podcasts.